7 years together, married for 2. If I'm being completely honest with myself now in a way I couldn't be then, I knew after the first year that something was fundamentally off between us. Not surface problems, not things we could fix with better communication or more date nights. Something deeper, something structural about how we fit together. But by year 1, we were already in deep. We'd met each other's families, spent holidays together, integrated our friend groups. We'd had conversations about the future, about marriage and kids and where we'd live. Walking away at that point felt impossible. So I convinced myself it was fine. I told myself every relationship has issues, that no one is perfect, that the butterflies fade and what's left is the real work of building a life together. I read articles about how to weather the hard parts of long-term commitment and convinced myself that's what I was doing, being mature, being realistic, not giving up just because things weren't effortlessly perfect anymore. I got really good at convincing myself. So good that I almost believed it, almost stopped hearing the small voice that kept whispering this isn't right. The convincing became easier over time as the investment grew larger. By year 3, we lived together. By year 5, we were engaged. By year 7, we were married with shared bank accounts and a lease we'd both signed. Each milestone made leaving feel more complicated, more costly, more impossible. The deeper in I got, the harder it became to acknowledge what I'd known from the beginning. I'd built a life around this person, around this relationship. Admitting it wasn't right would mean admitting I'd made a massive mistake, and I wasn't ready to face that. Looking back now with the clarity that only distance provides, I can see I was performing elaborate mental gymnastics to make it work in my head. Every concern got rationalized, every red flag got reframed, every moment of doubt got talked down. I became my own defense attorney, building a case for why this was okay, why this was enough, why I should stay. And I was convincing. I convinced my family, my friends, and most importantly, I convinced myself. At least on the surface. At least enough to keep going. All the signs were there from the very start if I'd been willing to see them clearly. How he never asked follow-up questions in conversations. I'd tell him something about my day, about a problem I was dealing with, about something I was excited about, and his response would be surface-level acknowledgement with no deeper engagement. No, how did that make you feel? No, what are you going to do about that? No, tell me more. Just, oh wow, or that's crazy, and then the conversation would shift to something else or die completely. I was always the one initiating plans. Always. If I wanted to see him, I had to text first. If I wanted us to do something together, I had to suggest it, research options, make the reservation, coordinate the timing. He'd agree to plans I made, but would never create them himself, never think ahead about what we could do together, never put in the effort of planning something because he wanted to spend time with me. I told myself he was just not a planner, that some people aren't good at that kind of thing, that it didn't mean anything about how he felt. He was content with surface-level everything while I craved depth. Surface-level conversations that never went below what happened that day. Surface-level connection that felt more like roommates than partners. Surface-level intimacy that met physical needs, but left me feeling empty emotionally. I wanted to talk about our dreams, our fears, our hopes for the future. I wanted to understand how his mind worked, what moved him, what he cared about deeply. But every attempt to go deeper would hit a wall. He'd shut down or change the subject or give answers so generic they revealed nothing. I told myself people grow together, that relationships evolve, that we just needed time to develop that deeper connection. I thought if I was patient enough, if I created enough space for vulnerability, if I modeled the kind of emotional intimacy I wanted, he'd eventually meet me there. I believed that 7 years together would naturally create depth through shared experiences and accumulated time. That eventually we'd arrive at the partnership I envisioned if I just kept trying, kept hoping, kept giving him time to grow into it. 7 years later, he was exactly who he'd always been. The same surface-level engagement, the same passive presence, the same emotional unavailability. He hadn't grown or changed or developed the capacity for depth I'd been waiting for. And why would he? I'd stayed regardless. I'd married him knowing who he was. I'd given him no reason to believe he needed to change because I'd accepted him as he was while secretly hoping he'd transform into someone different. The one who'd changed was me. I'd bent and accommodated and shrunk myself to fit into a relationship that required me to be smaller than I was. I stopped asking for deep conversations because they made him uncomfortable. I stopped initiating difficult topics because he'd withdraw. I stopped sharing my full emotional range because he couldn't handle anything beyond pleasant and easy. I'd minimized my needs, lowered my expectations, made myself compact enough to fit in the small space he was willing to give me. And I'd called that compromise, called it maturity, called it being a good partner. I kept hitting the same wall over and over, his emotional unavailability, his lack of effort, his inability to show up for me in the ways I needed. And I kept pretending I'd broken through, kept convincing myself this time was different, that we'd finally connected on a deeper level. I'd have what felt like a breakthrough moment, a conversation that seemed meaningful or a weekend where he seemed more present, and I'd think we'd turned a corner, that things were finally changing. Then a week later, I'd realize nothing had actually changed. The surface would crack again, revealing the same patterns underneath. He'd go back to minimal responses, passive presence, emotional distance. But I wanted it to be different so badly that I'd imagined progress where there was none. I'd taken one decent weekend and built an entire narrative around it about how things were improving, how my patience was paying off, how we were finally getting somewhere. It was delusion, but it was comfortable delusion. My friends saw what I refused to see. They'd gently ask if I was happy, their concern barely masked by careful phrasing. How are things going with him? They'd ask, emphasis on things that made it clear they had their doubts. You seem tired lately. Is everything okay? Trying to give me an opening to admit what they suspected. And I'd get defensive immediately. I'd list his good qualities. He's reliable, he's not mean, he has a stable job, he doesn't cheat. I'd change the subject, make a joke, redirect the conversation anywhere but the truth they were trying to help me see. Because admitting they were right meant admitting I'd wasted years on someone who was never going to meet me halfway, who'd never shown signs of being capable of it, who I'd chosen to stay with despite knowing better from year one. It meant facing that I'd sacrificed my 20s, the years I'd never get back, on a relationship that was fundamentally lacking. It meant acknowledging that all the convincing I'd done, all the accommodating and bending and hoping, it had been for nothing. He was still him, and I'd lost myself in the process. The truth is, I always knew. That's the hardest part to admit now. I knew he wasn't capable of the emotional depth I needed. Knew it when he'd respond to my vulnerable sharing with "that sucks" and nothing more. Knew it when he'd forget important things I'd told him. Knew it when I'd watch him be more engaged with a sports game than with me. The evidence was constant and clear. I just chose not to see it, chose to explain it away, chose to believe my narrative over my reality. I knew I was comfortable and he was constantly trying. Wait, no, I had that backward, and the backward version is what I'd been telling myself for years. He was comfortable. I was the one constantly trying. Comfortable sitting in his surface-level world while I exhausted myself trying to create depth, trying to bridge the gap between us, trying to build the partnership we supposedly had by myself. He was fine with how things were. I was the one who wasn't, who kept trying to make it into something it would never be. I knew I deserved better. Knew I deserved someone who asked follow-up questions, who wanted to know me deeply, who made plans because they wanted to spend time with me, who could handle my emotions without shutting down. Knew I deserved a partner, not a passive participant in a relationship I was maintaining alone. But knowing and accepting are very different things. You can know something intellectually while refusing to accept it emotionally. You can carry truth in your head while denying it with your actions. I spent 7 years knowing and pretending I didn't. 7 years of this elaborate performance where I convinced everyone, including myself, that everything was fine, that I was happy, that this was what I wanted. 7 years of pushing down the knowing every time it surfaced, of talking myself out of the truth every time it got too loud to ignore. Because accepting the knowing meant leaving. And leaving meant starting over at 33 instead of 26, having to date again, having to explain to everyone that the marriage they'd celebrated was ending, having to face that I'd wasted my 20s on someone who was never going to give me what I needed. Starting over felt impossible. More impossible than staying felt miserable, which is the calculation I'd been making every day for years. Is the pain of leaving greater than the pain of staying? And for a long time, the answer was yes. The fear of the unknown, of being alone, of admitting failure, of starting from scratch, it felt larger than the daily reality of being lonely in a relationship, of wanting more than I was getting, of knowing I deserved better, but accepting less. Until one day, that calculation shifted. Until one day, staying became more impossible than leaving. Not because anything dramatic happened, not because he did something unforgivable, just because the weight of pretending finally became heavier than the fear of truth. The exhaustion of maintaining the delusion, of performing happiness, of shrinking myself to fit, of hoping for change that would never come, it finally exceeded my capacity to carry it. And the knowing I'd been pushing down for 7 years surfaced and wouldn't be denied anymore. I'd spent 7 years knowing he wasn't right for me and choosing him anyway. Choosing comfort over truth, choosing fear over freedom, choosing his unchanged presence over my own needs. I'd given 7 years to someone I knew after one wasn't capable of meeting me, and I'd called it commitment when it was really just cowardice. Commitment to what? To someone who'd never committed back? To a future I knew didn't exist? To a version of him that was never real? The knowing had always been there, quiet but persistent. I'd always known. Known from year one, known through the engagement, known on our wedding day, known through 2 years of marriage. The clarity wasn't sudden or new, it was just finally accepted instead of denied. And accepting it meant leaving, meant ending the marriage everyone thought was fine, meant admitting I'd known better and stayed anyway. But staying one more day knowing the truth felt more impossible than facing it. So I stopped pretending, stopped convincing, and finally, I left. If you've stayed years knowing something was fundamentally off, convincing yourself and everyone else it was fine, you're not alone in that delayed clarity. Many have shared in the comments about knowing from early on, but spending years pretending they didn't. Sometimes the hardest part isn't seeing the truth, but finally accepting it. If this resonates, this space continues for those who've stopped pretending and started honoring what they always knew.